is growing more important in today's world with remote workforces and people needing all this information, right at their fingertips. And data visualization is actually at the crossroads of development and business analytics, big data. So it's becoming a more and more pressing issue for enterprise developers everywhere. Here to talk about it today with us is Alan Bondi. He's Vice President of Product Marketing and Innovation at Actuate. And before I bring him in, I just have a few brief housekeeping announcements to take care of. This session today is being recorded and will be available on the FType's website in the next day or so you can listen to it on demand over and over again to your heart's content and just enjoy the rich goodness over and over. Secondly, today's program is going to be followed by a live Q&A. And to ask a question, simply go to your control panel, go to the window that says questions, type it in, hit submit. We'll get to as many as time allows this afternoon. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce Alan Bondi. In his role as Vice President of Product Marketing and Innovation at Actuate, he's an advisor to several startups and a former digital media and internet CMO. He's an early proponent of self-service apps and data-driven marketing, and he's helped global leaders with their big data and customer experience strategies. He shares his perspectives as a contributor to Forbes.com, DM News, and Small Data Group, which is his top-rated blog. Prior to joining Actuate, he was partner and principal analyst at Digital Clarity Group, co-founder of social marketing pioneer OfferPop, and CMO and head of strategy at CRM consultancy eVergence, now of course known as Kana. He started his career as a researcher and data scientist in the telecom sector and was part of the teams at McKinsey and Yankee Group that did the early work in online advertising and e-commerce. And now, here with us today is Alan Bondi. Alan, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Dave, and thanks everybody for joining us. So I love this topic. It's really at the intersection of a lot of interesting trends in terms of what consumers want, in terms of what businesses are trying to do, in terms of what developers are striving to do in creating the so-called next big app. So I really wanted to share sort of our latest thinking, as well as some examples, as well as some learnings around this overall topic of how do we design great, compelling, in some cases embedded visualizations specifically for the new mobile consumer. So to do that, we need to embed analytics in these applications, and not just applications that we're specifically designing, I guess, as data-driven apps, but all the full range of applications that could be customer-facing like CRM or employee-facing like HRMS. Analytics, as we can see in a good way here, that analytics are an inherent part of this new generation of applications, number one. Number two, if we're embedding them, we do something in terms of providing context for the data and the information. So that to me is really critical, that information in context is the key to intelligence. And it's something that we talk about at Actuate, that equation is really true regardless of the end application. So, this is one nice data point from Gartner. If we go to the next slide, there's a broader trend as well around the idea of mobile applications, mobile-first design. So if the first example was about making our applications smarter, powered by data, from kind of an enterprise perspective, there's the creation of an amazing amount of data and an amazing amount of opportunity when we specifically look at mobile-first design and the emergence of, say, sensor data, that I'll return to that idea, that the number of so-called MEMS sensors that are being embedded within not just industrial applications, but being embedded in basically everyday devices, from phones to appliances to automobiles, is creating both demand for ways to visualize that data locally, as well as creating new sources that can feed our sort of smart applications. And then obviously you've got the general requirement here if we're trying to deliver data and information and visualizations. And so this idea of mobile business intelligence is emerging. What are the sort of things that we want to do? We want to be able to visualize data view it, select it, drill down, but also the idea of alerts comes up. And I'm going to return to that idea as well, that the notion of taking advantage of the real estate that you have within your mobile device tends to take us down the path to looking at things like alerts, where maybe you can pop up an alert on your phone that then allows you to select, drill down, explore further. But really you just need the alert in terms of, here's a deal if you're an online shopper, or here's a alert if your plane is running late, or in a factory situation, the supervisor getting alert on their phone that says, a production line has gone down or something like that. So when I sort of laid out the design challenges, first up is we understand that rich visualizations, pictures worth 1,000 words or 1,000,000 data points, so to speak, that we need to be thinking about extending these visuals. So classically, we're displaying them on a desktop. Increasingly, we're displaying visuals on tablets. Increasingly, we want to extend that to mobile devices, to wearables. How should we be thinking about extending those visuals and embracing sort of the version of charts or dashboards or infographics that fits within that use case of a mobile device? To us, good practice starts by sort of focusing on our goals specifically. So there's sort of the emerging discussion around special purpose apps and special purpose functionality within enterprise apps or vertical applications. And I think this is taking us down the path of looking at not just the broadest set of capabilities, but what are the specific goals that we have in mind that balance both what the user needs, but also what the business needs. So if we look at the next slide here, let's start with the user. So good design obviously starts by viewing the problem from the lens of the end consumer. And it's pretty clear that when we look at the mobile user, mobile apps should be interactive. They should be engaging. They should be proactive from the perspective of providing alerts. Increasingly, if we want to drive adoption of any kind of an online application, they should be personalized. And the reasons are that really mobile is becoming the predominant way that consumers are interacting digitally with brands, but also they're collecting lots of apps. And very cool stats from our friends at Localytics that close to 40% of apps are used 11 or more times, which sounds good, but then you have 20%, which is 1 in 5 apps that are only used once. So how do we create that level of engagement? It's pretty clear that we have to be more responsive in terms of being interactive. We have to design for portable experiences in terms of being proactive, and we have to be more timely, be more responsive in terms of personalized. And from a development perspective, I think this informs sort of a 3-pillar approach that I'm going to go into next. So it really starts with, if we go to the next slide, the idea of both enabling interactivity, which is core to the types of experience that Actuate has built for many years. So there's a couple examples here right in the screen of various visual, almost infographic style applications. On the left, sort of the big background is a flight sort of tracking application that has sort of a mashup of some visuals that you can interact with, line charts and various pie charts that allow you to drill in and explore in almost a visual infographic sort of a fashion. The smaller picture shows a world demographic sample app that we're releasing with the latest version of the IHub that shows how to create a native iOS type experience that's driven by BERT that I'll talk about in a second. So to me, there's sort of these two balancing points when you look at what users want. They want interactivity and they want a rich experience. But then from a business perspective, we want to be able to reuse the assets that we have and get out of the mode of creating sort of one app for one device. And so this is sort of the first, I guess, strategy or best practice that I want to present is, if we can start to think about the applications that we're fielding on different mobile devices, different tablets, different mobile platforms, even different wearable platforms, if we can look at ways to leverage the same base data, then we can not only boost performance as we serve them up, but also we can foster reuse. And this is sort of the enterprise perspective. It's not the consumer mobile app perspective necessarily, but this is kind of a perspective that says consumers want this certain experience, but also businesses want a certain efficiency and an economy of scale. So that would be the first pillar, is really think about how to drive interactivity, but also drive reuse at the same time. Next up,
Alan,
yeah.
I just wanted to jump in for a second. We did a feature a few months back on the concept of low-code development, which I guess, to define it in a different way, would be just kind of the next iteration of what would be like rapid application development, and some frameworks that are coming out for that. And the whole purpose, as you said, is to be able to reuse code, get applications out and deployed with a minimal amount of hand coding and a lot of reuse of parts and things. It sounds like that would be a good fit for this kind of creating visualizations.
Yeah, I love that idea. So I started reading about low code via some work that Forrester has published this past year. I'm sure there's other sources as well, but I've most recently looked at Forrester's work around, just as you said, what's the next wave of creating reusable components, templates, automating portions of the development cycle, really because of the pace of change by customer-facing applications. And that's kind of, if you look at some of the research that they've written, it's in the frame of these consumer-style, increasingly mobile-first environments where the time to market is incredibly important for brands and for enterprises. And so this low-code approach is not only a necessity, but it also kind of fits in this enterprise kind of style mobile development where certain things really can be automated and certain things can be driven by sort of some reusable components and APIs and the like. And so I like this very much. To us, it goes along with a couple other kind of value pillars for the style of applications that we're powering, not only sort of high scale, the ability to support potentially millions of users on many different devices being fed by lots of data sources. That's the scale part. So we kind of talk about high scale and low code together, and I think they really kind of reinforce each other. So I agree. It's an approach that I think is going to gain in importance, especially as we deliver richer experiences, each tailored to potentially millions of consumers, and we just don't have the time to do things fully custom for each one of those use cases.
Right. Well, that seems to be the twin drivers. It's the consumer expectation, and it's also the need for organizations to continue to do more with less and be efficient and still be productive.
Exactly right. So I think that this is a great starting point. If we go to the next slide, I think there's this sort of sub point, right, where there's the automation from the perspective of pushing out, for example, alerts based on a condition that then triggers an interaction with a consumer on one of these mobile devices. And then how do you do that at the back end? And so the premise here is, along with that idea of sort of basic interactivity and rich experience, which consumers want, and the economy of scale of wanting to reuse as many of those components and connectors so that you can serve those up, then there's sort of, once you start going down that path of having sort of some content centralized and some that's sort of created on the fly, if those data components, if you will, are in fact server side, it's a lot easier to kind of manage this experience. And that's sort of the point of this second part of the discussion is, if we're thinking about pushing out alerts based on some condition, we can do that usually more readily if we have that sort of centralized, and then we can blend in some of the local data, so maybe based on location or preference or other events. I'm just a big fan of alerts in terms of taking advantage of kind of the real-time nature and the context when you talk about a mobile device, because oftentimes that mobile device is the device of choice, when you're out of the office, when you're in a retail environment, or you're in an airport or something like that, and that essential information, you don't need the full picture, but you need that sort of trigger that then would allow you to explore further. So, when I think about alerts, you go back to the Dresner, the embedded BI sort of functionality. That was one of the key functions for this sort of mobile BI use case. But also, I think it's just a basic functionality for a lot of these mobile applications, especially as you're targeting consumers, right? Like in a retail setting, triggered by a display ad, maybe with near field or retail, or even the idea of connecting in an enterprise setting or in a factory sort of setting, where you want to provide certain little snippets, sort of the small data, if you will, to a consumer or to a decision maker, that then allows them to take some action that then will take them down the path of more fully exploring the visuals or exploring kind of the complete picture. But they just need that trigger. They just need the alert or the notification that says, here, there's new data for you to look at. Here, it's time to consume it. But you start that process by taking the first step of clicking Show Me More, and then in the scenario that we've most recently premiered at our data-driven summits, you might display that on a smartwatch, that alert, but then the call to action is to click and drill down, and then in our scenario, we actually have that fuller information displayed on a paired mobile device. So I think there's interesting use cases emerging for that combination of smartwatch or wearable with a paired mobile device. So the third part of this, and this is kind of the payoff, is to us, embedded analytics, and this is it's a sub-market of the broader business intelligence and analytics market. It's a significant part, depending on which market survey you look at, as much as 20–25% of the overall business intelligence and analytics market is embedded. If we think about this just from a sort of data delivery, data consumption, if we want to bring data everywhere, right, so to all of these new consumers, the back end has to be specifically, pretty lightweight, easy to customize, and especially brand friendly. And this is sort of the third part of what we talk about. So high scale is one sort of value point when we look at the embedded analytics market. You need to be able to scale, again, at least as well as your kind of host application can scale. The second part being low code, as we talked about. The third part is kind of the white label idea that increasingly, if you're designing these applications, that the visualization part is one part of the overall application experience. And so it needs to be very brand friendly in terms of that experience, especially when we talk about limited real estate. So these non-traditional devices, we think it's a huge opportunity. It's just getting started. This, to me, if I'm a mobile developer, this is where I'm focusing, is looking at platforms and looking at development approaches that aren't kind of traditional mobile, but are thinking about mobile from the frame of lots of different types of devices. And then this approach that should be lightweight, should be easy to customize, that's sort of the whole idea of white label, that when you're providing the data in context, we have to take the cues both design-wise and data-wise from the context and present an experience that just is very natural for the end consumer.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I can tell you that my company produces, shameless plug here, the Wearables Technology Conference. It'll be in March next year. And this is just an exploding market. People want to be able to get, the Fitbit or the Google Glass, or, they want data to come to them. And as you said, you made the point, it's more data snippets and alerts and things of that nature than actual full data. And so that, as you pointed out, creates an interesting challenge for developers who are trying to, prioritize what do they want to deliver, what form is it going to get delivered in, and things of that nature. But it is a hot market.
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing, coming off of our recent summit series. We talked about a lot of things, but when we showed our smartwatch demo, everybody kind of moved forward, and people were oohing and ahhing, not because they were necessarily developing a smartwatch app or had a pending initiative to give, their Salesforce smartwatches. But the idea of connecting sort of data sourced from devices and repurposing it and packaging it and visualizing it back to other devices is very appealing. And I think it also necessarily takes you down the path of, it's all about APIs, and especially, things like a REST API become more and more important to be able to, stream data, directly to a device and be able to put together sort of these, as we'll talk about, these kind of native hybrid applications that are a combination. They really are a mashup of things that are going to be created on the device sort of in a native approach, or assembled or streamed from the server side, that the discussion quickly moves from mobile to embedding to APIs and making sure that you have kind of that fullest set of APIs so that you can get at whatever, the visual, the chart, the data in a very seamless way, because we haven't even conceived the ways that this might be assembled in terms of the end experience. So let me just kind of transition a little bit, if we go to the next slide, into I guess the next class of challenges. So if we talked about the idea of extending what we already have to these mobile and wearable devices, once we're within the mobile frame, how do we think about displaying visuals, and how do we think about the right deployment model for different users and use cases, and how do we go back to first principles and think about the different, I guess, stages of the customer journey? Because in almost all cases, whether that customer is a real customer or a business user, they're on some journey to some outcome, whether it's, checking an account balance to make a financial transaction, or comparing products before they make a purchase, or doing research on competitors before they launch a campaign. That there's this journey, and the way that we can inform that journey is going to be driven by data. And so, they're going to have different devices at different stages of that journey, because it might start in an office or in a retail setting, and then then you're in your car, and then you're at home, and then you're out and about on your mobile device or on your smartwatch or wearable. So how do we think about sort of displaying information in this mobile sort of multi-mode environment, and then how do we think about deployment? So if we go to the next slide, it actually starts with design, and it's less about technology. And for those in the audience who know Edward Tufte or Stephen Few, these guys are and have been sort of great references, sort of the guiding voices in terms of information design in general, and how you turn data into visuals, and how you can apply sort of good design and best practice, whether you're building information dashboards, or whether you're visualizing economic data or healthcare data or demographic data in just a non-technical way. And I guess my recommendation is for people who aren't familiar with these guys to take a look at some of their writing. They have websites, they have blogs, they have a number of books you can get. And the goal here is really to think about good information design as kind of the starting point, especially when you look at smaller and smaller real estate in certain types of wearable devices, when you may have like a single line of characters that you can show, or smaller formats in your watches and smartphones. So we need to follow good information design. Examples for Stephen Few, and there's a lot of them. They have sort of the best practices and principles. When we talk about mobile, these become sort of concentrated. So displaying just what information is relevant for the task and audience, using visual tricks, so to speak, in terms of size and location of your visual elements to encode the quantitative information, using different charts in different ways to fully express the relationships between data. I mean, one of the things that or Edward Tufte talks about is creating visual comparisons to really tell your story. And you start to think about this, and then you start to visualize it within a design environment. And this is kind of the part of the art and science is not about technology, but rather about how do we present visually the story, the elements, the comparisons that we want the end consumer to make. So this is part of it. This is one of the ingredients, right? You can't really do what we're talking about without this good information design. The second part, if we go to the next slide, is how do we start to render this within the mobile environment? So good information design is necessary but not sufficient to creating good mobile applications. We also have to think about the different development models. And so as I've thought about this, there's at least these four, each of which is appropriate in different ways. Native, sort of self-explanatory, where you have the app developed exclusively in the local native language for each device. If I'm going to be creating games, I'm probably doing this. Then there's sort of the old school mobile web where the whole app is on the server and you're kind of, providing access via a mobile browser. So those are sort of the two, I guess, extreme cases. And then you have these two kind of flavors of hybrid where in the hybrid case, you have application components that are, again, on the server, and you're starting to get some economy of scale because they're in a non-platform specific language, and then you've got kind of a wrapper here that facilitates the local distribution. And then this sort of native hybrid approach that we like, where some of those components are in a native platform specific language and other components are on the server. And this, to me, is kind of the best of both worlds. Each one of these styles is appropriate for different applications, but from a business perspective, and this is sort of where we're coming from, it seems like this native hybrid approach, powered by HTML5, powered by some of the APIs like JS API and REST API, allows this sort of maximum flexibility and a good balance, I guess, between what the user wants and their experience and what the business wants in terms of efficiency, economy of scale, reuse, and things like that. So moving on, sort of as I get into the wrap up here, if we talked about the initial pillars, starting with how do we extend, how do we start to leverage and create the most effective display, the most effective experience within the frame of the mobile environment, how do we scale this up? And again, our perspective is from working with really big banks and telcos and organizations that they're dealing with potentially millions of users and many data sources, and the need to provide kind of very personalized experiences for each one of those potentially millions of consumers. Delivering that kind of rich visualization as well as actionable insight, and this is to me really important, especially within a mobile frame, is being actionable. And it's sort of the difference between kind of big data and small data, as I've written over the years. Small data is where you take your big data and you package it visually so that it's super accessible and understandable and actionable for kind of everyday stuff. And that's really what we're talking about here. So how do we make these visuals very actionable and personal on whatever device that end consumer wants, and do that so that you can scale, so that the business isn't creating a separate version of every app for every device and even every single user. So to us, this is where we start to build on what we've done around open source, and it's really why we built our mobile strategy and our capabilities on the Eclipse, BERT Foundation, as well as some of our commercial offerings. And that's what I just wanted to touch on, starting with the next slide. So people who aren't familiar, and I'm sure a number of you are currently using BERT, and maybe have for some time because it's been out in the market now for coming up on 10 years. It's a top-level Eclipse project, very active community. It's a full standalone development environment that's really been evolved, and a lot of the innovation comes out of the community of close to 4 million developers. There's very interesting things happening at Eclipse around IoT and around device data and embedded analytics and the like. For people who aren't familiar with BERT, there's an IDE that's open source, and there's also a commercial version that Actuate offers. Probably most exciting to me is back in the summer we released a freemium server, what we call the BERT IHub FType, and that allows BERT developers to really sort of supercharge their designs and deploy them with added interactivity and security and new visual design capabilities, as well as scheduling and things like that. So a lot of things that people are looking to do in terms of scaling their designs. And basically FType is a full functioning version of the IHub server that's been in market for a couple years, and it's only limited by how much output you can produce each day.
So if I could just ask a quick question here. So FType is the free version, and it's what? It's the design environment for creating the visualizations?
It's actually the server environment. So it works in tandem with either the open source designer or the commercial designer. So once you have those designs, you load them into FType, and FType's basically it's the commercial server, except it's delivered as a freemium product, so you get the full capabilities of the commercial product, but you're limited by the amount of output that you can produce each day. It's it's similar to some of the other freemium models, like a Splunk that's limited on the input data, but in this case you can produce on the order of a couple hundred reports a day, or a couple dozen dashboards before you hit that output limit. So you can do that for free, and then there's the ability to either buy additional data packs, if you will, because some people just like kind of buying as they go in terms of data capacity, or we found that this is a great way for organizations who say are not ready to procure a new product, but they want to develop kind of a prototype or proof of concept departmental app. They can use FType. They can do real work in it and then use that to sort of see the benefits of using the IHub in terms of some of the functionality that I gave. So it's a full-on IHub, just limited by that output data.
Got it. Thank you.
And it's interesting because we've used it with some of our latest mobile demonstrations. For example, our smartwatch, the sort of telematics example that we rolled out at our latest event series, that takes data from actually a Toyota Prius and streams it into using MQTT into the IHub. The developers, the engineers that built that actually used the FType for that. So these kind of demonstration IoT or mobile applications are really well suited for the FType because they're not typically using a lot of data, but they're nevertheless very compelling kind of demonstrations of connecting up different devices, transforming it, then visualizing it with the FType and pumping it out into, for example, in our case, into a smartwatch and into a paired mobile device. So this really builds on the 10 years of investment in BERT and the work that the Eclipse community has done. And I would argue that, especially when we talk about mobile development, that it's even more important to have this kind of open foundation to build on. If we go to the next slide, I think this even comes to life further with, if you look at kind of a staged process for how we think about supporting the key tasks, the key stages of rolling out these sort of mobile data-driven applications, where you're combining data from multiple sources, you're managing that experience for what each user sees, because there could be very different experiences for different users based on permissions or based on kind of their task that they're working on. This idea of personalizing and making it very interactive based on role or based on task going back to some of the first principles, we think that mobile apps need to be interactive and personal and very proactive. And so this is certainly part of the cycle here. Then driving interaction, driving behavior, driving action, because we favor this kind of native hybrid approach, it's all about sort of getting the right data just at the right time for specific tasks. And then these last two steps is to me sort of where mobile is especially interesting, because there's the notion of adapting your application by analyzing that sort of real-time usage, and that there's ways obviously within the application environment itself to look at the consumption, which functions people are using, where they're consuming the app if you're gathering location data, to analyze this adoption and behavior in real time, using a third-party tool or just natively, and then doing this kind of updating so that these applications, especially in a mobile frame, become more kind of continuously adaptive or continuously optimizing application experiences, and based on how people are consuming the data, then feed that information back, and it becomes part of the next set of updates that are rolled out. So this to me is kind of how I'm starting to think about application development from the mobile usage perspective, but also it also reinforces why this kind of native hybrid approach kind of makes sense, because you can be adapting some of the server components and creating economy of scale there, and also providing kind of unique experiences with the native component as well. So if we go to the next slide, this is kind of the schematic of how this fits together when we put IHub in the middle. And again, as I pointed out, this could be BERT IHub FType. So you can do everything on this picture basically using the free BERT designer and the BERT FType. So everything you see, all the scenarios I described, you could be creating at least as an initial stage with open source and the freemium product, which is obviously why a lot of people are embracing the FType. In this case, and this to me is again from the enterprise perspective, that the IHub is essentially your enterprise mobile app information layer, I guess, in this scenario. And what the IHub does is it offers scale, it offers improved interactivity, it gives efficiency and kind of low-code benefits in terms of how do you store and manage and secure your data. And it basically is this bridge between all of your data sources. We have the idea of a data object within IHub that allows you sort of a metadata layer, to manage all your sources on the right-hand side. And then from a visualization perspective, just like we did in our scenario with the card data, we can serve up any number of visual formats from that same base data set. So in some cases, maybe you want a dashboard that's displayed on a device, or you want an alert that's served up based on a certain trigger to a smartphone, or you want to create full-on multi-page reports, or you want to have more kind of drill down interactive analytical kind of visualizations. That's all served up from this one IHub, and the efficiency comes not only how it's easy to connect up your data sources, because again, BERT is defining that data access. It also allows you to be very efficient, because if you think about sort of the task being split between the native device level side and the server side, you're very efficient because you're only returning kind of the relevant data for specific client needs. So this is kind of a neat way to think about it. And if you go back to our telematics example, the car is generating data on that right-hand side. We're pumping in that real-time data via the MQTT broker. And then everything else just sort of, that was the one major addition to that scenario, to be able to go from device data to a smartwatch. To us, IoT data is just another source.
Right, yeah, you had mentioned that earlier in the presentation. I think that's fantastic to be able to use the one hub for any platform. I just want to jump in here for a second and remind our attendees that if they have any questions they'd like to ask Alan and have them get addressed, they can just go to their control panel, type the question in, hit submit, and as I said earlier, we'll get to as many as time allows. So Alan, I know you have some concluding remarks here, so please get back into that, and then we'll take some questions a little later on.
Yeah, great. So let's end with the checklist, the next slide here. So, our goal, if we think about this from a user perspective, which we always should. So, I love talking about technology and I love talking about business objectives, but, good things happen when we think about the end user and sort of their journey. So if our goal is to allow users to get, just the data that they want, when they want it, how they want it, visualized in the format tailored to their device, if we think about developing sort of a mobile wearable platform, it should be about managing, accessing, analyzing, delivering data, from whatever source in a secure way, because that's sort of understood that this has to be secure yet very flexible. We want to deliver this tailored to the profile, so personalized delivery is still a big part of what we want to do. But so is display, and back to the notion of information design. I think that what we're talking about today is going to combine some art and some science, and not only the infrastructure side in terms of scale and in terms of access and security, but also displaying just the right information, as Stephen Few talks about, just the relevant information for each device, for your location, for the user profile, and then ultimately allowing that consumer of the visual to interact, to explore, and then ultimately to take action. And that to me is the end goal for all of us, that whether we're a retailer or a bank or a tech company, we want our consumers, the users, to take action based on our data, and that action itself produces more data. And once we blend in that behavioral information, then we have additional data points that can allow us to serve up more refined visuals, and so on and so on. And so thinking about this, I guess, a little bit more holistically, we love the open source foundation. We're committed to, and we've invested a lot in the BERT community. And then coupled with the IHub, we think of that as sort of one platform that enables all of the above things that we just talked about in kind of a unified, embeddable, API-centric kind of a way. And if we even go to the next slide, this is sort of to bring it home. It is about interacting, it's about automating, it's about embedding and doing that at scale, and providing a lot of samples for people to get started. So in the new release of the iHub, which will be out by the end of the year, part of our focus has been not only to add new capabilities like the REST API, but also sample applications, because we want the community, we want you all to play around and to come up with ideas that we can, capture through the BERT community to create, new ways to visualize data, for example, on an iPad, which is one of the sample apps, or alerts on wearables, which is the Wear framework that we're working on. The goal here is providing, I guess, the most open approach and providing resources to the community so that you can, sort of envision where you're going with your application development, but hopefully shift your thinking, as we have, from developing apps for specific devices, specific phones, specific tablets, to building once and then reusing those assets to visualize data basically across any device, not just the current generation devices, but future devices. And that's really how we're thinking about this, and hopefully the discussion here has been helpful just to sort of frame up what you're going to work on next year.
Hey, Alan, so I see on this slide you talk about iOS sample apps and other things like that. Where are these apps available?
So we're going to be promoting and providing the sample apps, and there's several, including a couple of tablet apps on GitHub. We also have a fair amount of blog posts and videos that talk about the wearables, the sort of smartwatch scenario. I mean, that's very new. We premiered it at our data-driven summits just over the last month, so we haven't really published that as much as we've. There is actually a blog post because an earlier version was presented at, I want to say, EclipseCon Europe by one of our engineers. So there is some information on that scenario, and then we have some videos that are going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks. So code will be on GitHub and in the BERT community, and then other assets will be on the Actuate website. So we're all about providing as much of this information out to the community, because just like BERT, we think that the mobile development and the IoT development is going to be driven as much by the community and folks outside of Actuate as people within Actuate. And we just flipped up go to actuate.com if you want to download the FType. I encourage people, if you haven't played around with it, you'll love the sort of 15-minute experience, and it's a good way to get a sort of a nice quick introduction to the enterprise server approach in terms of interactivity and scheduling, and a very cool sort of visual editor for the BERT designs, and just some nice capabilities in the FType, and you can use it for free. And then if you want to copy down that bit.ly there is an early version of this car telematics demo that we filmed at our Santa Clara event, and then in the next week or two there's going to be additional video from our New York event that is very cool. So with this, why don't we open things up for some questions, because I know we've covered quite a bit here.
Yes, we have a few questions have come in from our attendees. We'll start with the first one and just jump right into it. So which mobile development environments does Actuate support?
So this is a good one, because BERT is itself a development environment, and our philosophy is really to embed in whatever environments you're working in. So think about BERT and think about IHub as really an embedded analytics or data visualization platform. And then if you're working in whatever language, whatever environment, you basically can embed these visualizations within that environment. So we have clients ranging from large package software vendors to people building set-top boxes to building banking applications. Our goal is really to exist within those environments, because it's based on an open platform, but most importantly, it has kind of all the APIs, including the newest addition, the update to the REST API. So think of us as sort of a specialty platform that works in tandem with whatever environment that you're working in.
Very good. Okay, next attendee writes, there are a lot of back-end data suppliers and database types. Do these solutions work with any subset of those?
So I guess we haven't seen a data source that we couldn't interface with. There's a long list of interfaces and APIs. For example, we have customers who are pulling in any number of traditional transactional data sources, or NoSQL, or social media data, or mobile data. So if there's one way to think about, I guess, the embedded analytics space, if you're evaluating whatever platform, I recommend people start with requesting the list of APIs, and that usually is a good indicator of the ability to support kind of the different data sources. So I would say, from our perspective, we've got a very extensive set of APIs, and a lot of the innovation kind of at the edge is happening from the BERT community as well. So we've pretty much integrated with everything that you can imagine. But also my recommendation to the audience is, as you look at developing these data visualizations, especially in large scale, is take a look first at the APIs. Second, the types of visuals that you can create. Third, I guess the white label, how can you easily embed and make it, the look and feel kind of match the brand experience that you're already delivering. And that combination sort of scale, low code, and white label is sort of the way that we think about it. I think it's good practice regardless of the tool that you use.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And another question now from an attendee who wants to know, why would I do native hybrid? What is the difference from straight hybrid?
So that's a good one. I mean, those two scenarios, when I talked about them, maybe it's kind of subtle, but I like, both approaches are valuable. I guess we like the native hybrid approach because it allows you to have kind of, some things that are optimized for the device and some things that are more general purpose across all devices. Now, where you pick that operating point, I guess that's kind of up to you. And in that case, if that operating point, when you say we're going to do native hybrid, at some point it becomes kind of one scenario within native hybrid is kind of that hybrid scenario. Which one you pick, again, is going to depend on the application that you're developing, but by default, we like native hybrid because it is kind of the best of both worlds, and it kind of balances, to me, sort of the experience for that consumer on the device, taking advantage of the device capabilities and for example, visualizations made for iOS, along with some parts of the application that might be kind of assembled from the data, and you're serving up the full visualizations. And if people explore, when it's available, some of the iOS sample apps, one of the ones that we show is in fact that scenario where we're visualizing some data natively using kind of the iOS visuals, and some data is assembled as a BERT report served up from the server side. And the trick is picking kind of the right combinations based on what the information design requires, but also from the user perspective, making sure that it's very seamless. So the end experience is just going to look like it's all part of that application, whether it's served up from the servers or created on the fly for the device. I think that's the kicker, is creating this approach that is seamless. And from the end user perspective, it just looks great and it works great. And then the combination is going to be a function of sort of what data has to be created kind of on the fly versus what's kind of native to the device. But regardless of whether you call it native or native hybrid, our recommendation is to focus on native hybrid, and then in certain cases it's going to be more of a flavor of native, but nonetheless it's going to take advantage of kind of the device side and the server side working together, as opposed to one versus the other.
All right. Looks like we're getting close to being right up against time. I just wanted to make a little observation from what we've seen here at SD Times in terms of data. We know that big data is a very big topic, and at first people were like, well, how do I deal with all of this data? I need storage. And then when they solved that problem, they were like, well, how do I access the data? How do I slice and dice? We've kind of gotten past that with Hadoop and some of these other things. Now what everybody is looking for from the data is insight, and these visualizations play right into that, where the data is meaningless unless you can actually get anything out of it that then you can act upon and either put a new program in place, put a new product in place, what have you. So certainly the importance of creating these data visualizations that put that information, as I said earlier, in the right hands at the right time in the right way is just going to become more and more critical as we go forward. One thing I would like, Alan, if you would, in about 30 seconds or so, give us a summation or the one key takeaway of the people who sat through us here today. We appreciate them hanging in there with us. What would be the main takeaway for them this afternoon?
I think just like how a lot of the market is now focused on delivering kind of the value of big data to the most end users, I think the potential for developers to really do some high-value stuff, the barrier to participating in these kind of enterprise-scale, increasingly wearable applications continues to be lowered. And the two examples would be, you can do some pretty cool things, just with the open source BERT designer, and that coupled with the capabilities in the FType. I think the power that's now available to a broader set of designers is just amazing. And so to me, it mirrors this sort of the power of big data now delivered to more users, not just the data scientists. I think the same thing is happening with innovation from the platform perspective is solutions like FType and the freemium model take what was previously a high-end enterprise solution and it makes it available to businesses and development teams of all sizes, and that to me that's pretty revolutionary. So I think the takeaway is take advantage of that. And if you haven't played around with FType, download it and play around, and the power is now really in the hands of the people in all ways. And I think that to me is the theme for 2015 is not just mobile first, but creating real enterprise scale applications at almost a way that we're, consumer small scale developers can now build real mission critical applications because all of this has come down market and freemium makes it accessible to basically everybody.
Excellent. Okay, so I would like to thank Alan Bondi. Again, he's Vice President of Product Marketing and Innovation at Actuate. Alan, thank you very much for a great presentation. I also would like to thank Actuate for sponsoring today's webinar. And of course, I would like to thank the audience for participating with us today, asking some good questions. We appreciate that. Until next time, I'm Dave Rubenstein from FType saying so long for now.